head to the next table where we've got 5-4 suited in the big blind as soon as I sit down. Player in middle position limps in with the short stack, the cutoff raises to 25. The button calls, I call for 20 more, the middle position player calls as well, we're going 4 ways to the flop out of position, it comes 4-4 deuce rainbow, we've got trips immediately at this new location. Unfortunately, everyone checks. The turn's the 3 of diamonds, giving us an open-ended straight draw to go along with our 3 fours. We can't allow this to check through again, I bet 75 for value. The middle position player is contemplating what to do. It's a little scary for us because he only limp called the raise pre-flop. A lot of people tend to take this line with small pocket pairs or small suited connecting hands, so on a paired board with all low cards, it's very possible that this opponent could already have a full house or a straight. He calls. It's also possible that he just has something like pocket fives or maybe a diamond flush draw. The initial pre-flop raiser calls in the cutoff, the button calls as well. After no one showed interest on the flop, all 3 of our opponents are willing to call a larger size turn bet. We may not be best. The river is the 4 of diamonds, giving us quad 4s in an incredible spot. I bet 400, which will probably look like a wild bluff because our line is kind of ridiculous. We didn't 3-bet pre-flop, so we'll rarely have pocket pairs like 10s or better. We bet on the turn, indicating that we had a straight, a small full house, or trip 4s. With a third 4 out there, our hands like pocket 3s and pocket deuces get counterfeited, and a straight is more worthless than an NFT collection. The big bet looks like I've got exactly quads or complete air. The middle position player only has 225 in his stack. He's getting over 40% off the retail price. That's a bargain that he can't turn down. He calls, the cutoff folds quickly. The action's on the button. He only has 335, so he'd be getting a discount as well. The button saw the middle position player struggling to decide whether or not to call, so maybe the middle position opponent doesn't have much, and it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to river quads. It's very possible the button talks himself into looking us up.
Well, I came to play. I call.
Calls as well.
Quads.
Nice.
We get called by the middle position player's 6-5 of hearts, which was a turn straight. I've got some NFTs to sell that guy. And then we also get called by the button's pocket 8s in a 3-way all-in while we've got the nuts. I don't think that I've ever stacked multiple players with quads before. To the button's credit, he takes the loss better than anyone I've ever seen.
You come to Savannah, dinner's on me.
Oh, nice, man. Wow. Thank you, man.
It's awesome to play these cash game events and be around people with such good attitudes, even when they get stacked. If I'm ever in Savannah, which is on my list of places to visit, I'll definitely check out Chizito's Latin Cuisine to redeem the dinner for 2. In the meantime, I'm glad to finally make a strong hand and get paid off. This win gets us all the way out of the hole. We're up over 600. It's nice to have some profit to work with. After adding on for 500, we pick up 8-5 suited on the button. Under the gun limps in. I don't see it until I'm already in the process of grabbing raising chips. I'm not going to change my plan of attack now, except I raised to 40 instead of 30. Usually, if there's just one limper, I pretty much ignore the limp and play my normal range or just a slightly tighter one. Since in this hand, a player limps from under the gun, a spot where people sometimes limp monster hands, I could have reasonably folded or potentially limped in on the button too. The big blind calls. He's the only person at the table that I don't recognize. He's in town for an accounting convention. Under the gun calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. The dealer puts out King Queen 10 all hearts. We flop a flush in a multi-way pot. Checks to us. We don't want any more hearts coming out, otherwise our monster will turn into a hand with very little value. This board is also one in which a recreational player can easily overestimate the strength of a particular holding, like top pair. In this instance, top pair is drawing nearly dead against us. I bet 100 for value and protection. No one will be folding the ace or jack of hearts for that amount. I expect to get some calls by 2-pair hands and straights as well. Sets from my opponents will be very unlikely with 3 Broadway cards out there, since one player limped in and neither player 3-bet me pre-flop. The big blind calls 100. He's the person that I was interested in playing a big pot with the most. Under the gun folds. It's down to heads up. I'm rooting for blanks. The turn is the deuce of diamonds. It doesn't get more blank than that. The big blind checks. He's wearing my favorite outfit to see at a poker table, consisting of a suit jacket and a lanyard. His wristband is icing on the cake. Businessmen who are in town tend to call light more often than they should. I'm going to play into that, going with all big sizes here. I bet 300. Occasionally the big blind will have a better flush than me, and my stack will do a disappearing act. If I'm beat, I expect to hear from the opponent right now. We just get a call. If we don't currently have the best hand, I'd be shocked. The river is the 7 of spades, completing the dream run out. The big blind checks himself, but that doesn't preclude him from wrecking himself. We've got 1,085 total. With our sizing throughout the hand, we've set ourselves up well for a jam that's a little more than the pot. We're going for it. We put the opponent to the ultimate test, much harder than any CPA exam he's ever taken. Since we don't get snap called, we can rule out being beat. I'm rooting for a call. I can see it in the big blind's eyes that he doesn't want to give it up. I have the face of someone who never has it, and the body of Gumby. After a minute, the opponent flicks in a yellow bird for the call. We show him that on our way to the Uppaton Peninsula, we took him to Value Town with a small flush. I got 2 degrees in accounting. I worked for Ernst & Young for a year, and I'm still technically a CPA, although inactive. This is by far the best experience that I've ever had that involved accounting. Let's listen to what the opponent was thinking.
I was putting you on face of hearts with the queen there.
Yeah.
And I had a king in the open-ended.
Our shove got called by King Jack with no heart, just top pair. I make a note to never bluff this guy, but instead go for value more often and for more money because he calls light. I'm going to pick out pocket nines in the cutoff. A few more pros have entered the game to replace some of the recreational players, so it's not quite as good as it was at first. I raised to 100. One of those new pros 3 bets to 460, which isn't very nice of him. It's a large sizing. Still, we're both deep. If we can flop a set, maybe we can win a big one. I call for 360 more. We're heads up in position. The dealer puts out 10-9-3 with 2 spades. We've got middle set on a coordinated board. I'm trying to contain my excitement as the opponent reaches for chips. He down bets at 360. I'm debating whether or not we should make our move now. We don't want to see any spade or really any overcard to the board because they'll either complete possible straight draws, potentially give my opponent a higher set, or possibly scare my opponent from wanting to put more money in the pot if he has queens, for example, and an ace or king comes out. It's best to try and get as much money in now as possible. I raise to 1,000. The opponent doesn't appear to be considering a fold. It looks like he's either going to call or raise. I wouldn't be able to get my chips in fast enough if he does raise. If he has a set of 10s, it's just not our day. The big blind calls. He probably has some type of strong draw or an overpair. The turn is the 8 of diamonds. Queen Jack, Jack 7, and 7-6 make a straight. The big blind checks. Despite our hand being downgraded, we can't allow the opponent to see a free card. I'm sticking with our plan to target overpairs and big flush draws. I increased the bet sizing to 3,000. I don't exactly want to get jammed on, but we'll certainly be calling a shove if the opponent rips it. Instead, he calls. If he had us beat, he would have gotten it all in by now. The fact that he didn't makes me very confident that we've got the best hand. The only holding that I could see the opponent playing the same way up to this point that beats us is exactly Queen Jack of spades. Even then, I still think he probably would have shoved the turn. The river is the 6 of clubs, putting 4 to the straight on board. This has become a huge pot. We have $7,010 behind. The big blind checks. It's not likely that the opponent has a 7 in his hand, and we've already ruled out a set of 10s in most Queen Jack combinations. Even with 4 to the straight on board, by process of elimination, I'm confident that we've got the winner. If we want to bet, our best option is to shove. The opponent could still possibly call us with any overpair if he thinks that we're bluffing with a missed draw like King Jack or a missed flush draw. Earlier on in my poker career, I'd occasionally play scared and check back a hand like this one on this board. Not anymore. I jam for over $7,000. If we get called, this will be a $23,000 pot, which would be the biggest pot that I've ever played at Bellagio. We don't get snaps, so I'm feeling better and better about the situation. The big blind is perplexed. He isn't sure if I'm bluffing or not. The nuts have drastically changed since the flop came out, yet here I am, firing big on all 3 streets, saying that I'm not afraid to play for stacks. The big blind puts in a handful of yellow calling chips. We excitedly turn over our middle set. It's good. We get the absolute maximum to win the biggest pot that we've ever won at this property. There's no better feeling in poker than using all the information available to you to make the most money possible. After we get a count of the chips, the entire pot comes our way. The pro who we got is steaming and immediately picks up the scraps that he has remaining. I've dipped slightly below the even mark when I pick up pocket 3s under the gun +1 and another straddle pot. Actually, from here on out, every hand is 5, 10, 20. It's a big game. I raised to 50. The small blind is the only caller. We're heads up in position. The flop comes 10-9-3 with 2 spades. We've got bottom set. The opponent checks. There's a fairly coordinated board, so I could bet 50% or more of the pot. I really want to make sure I get at least some value though, and I bet $50 again in order to ensure that I can get called by an even wider range of hands. I don't like this decision as much with bottom set. It'd be better to use that sizing with top set since it's a lot less likely in that scenario that my opponent would have top pair. Small blind calls 50. Maybe I can get him to put a lot more money in on future streets. The turn is the deuce of diamonds. I love to see that. We still have the 3rd best possible hand. The small blind checks. I want to target top pair hands, and believe it or not, the small blind could have reasonably flatted my pre-flop raise with a hand as good as pocket queen, so there's some small possibility that I'm up against an overpair. I increased my sizing to 180. This should look a bit like a bluff. I would have taken a similar line with a hand like ace-5 of diamonds or potentially even a front door flush draw. The larger bet doesn't deter the small blind from sticking around, he calls. I've got 14-35 behind, and the opponent has me slightly covered. You may be thinking, stacks are pretty large compared to how big the pot is. It's weird to bring attention to that detail, but my mind is focused on getting every chip that I can get. The river is the 5 of clubs. It's one of the best cards that the dealer could have put out there. Both flush draws miss. All of the most obvious straight draws like queen jack and 8-7 miss, and no overcards came out. If our opponent has a hand like ace-10, this is set up perfectly for us to get maximum value. The small blind checks. I'm thinking about how this hand has played out so far and how much I want to bet. If my opponent has a missed draw, he won't be able to call a bet of any amount, and he's called 2 bets so far, indicating that if he does have a hand with showdown value, it's likely pretty solid, and he'd probably be willing to call a big bet here. I bet the biggest amount that I can. That's right. We're all in for about 2.5 times the size of the pot. I'm hoping this will look like a last-ditch effort of mine to steal what's in the middle with a hand like queen jack of clubs or diamonds. A lot of the time when I've made plays like this in the past, it actually has been with complete air. You might be thinking it's stupid to do this for value since it's so unlikely that I'll be able to get called by something worse, and I'm just squandering a great opportunity to at least make some money, perhaps up to even 400 or 500. I mostly agree with that assessment, but occasionally I need to mix it up. And when I don't have any cards blocking top pair or second pair, this seems like an okay spot to swing for the fences, particularly when there were plenty of draws that have missed. This play doesn't need to work out that often in order for it to make me a lot of money. The opponent is in agony. He certainly doesn't have me beat, and almost definitely only has one pair at best. After tanking for 50 seconds, the small blind comes to a decision. This is one of the few times we massively overbet for value and actually get called. We smash one into the bleachers to win a $3,500 pot. Not only do we get paid the maximum, but this helps balance my range for when I actually am bluffing for large amounts. I'm ecstatic to get called here. The session's going great. We're up around 1,700 with plenty of poker left to be played. Pick up pocket aces for the first time today in the cutoff. A player in middle position does some of the heavy lifting for us by raising to 40. He's another pro. He's probably the new first or second toughest opponent for us at the table. You can see him sitting right across from us. I'll give you one guess as to the continent he's from. I'll give you a clue. He's not from North America, South America, Africa, Australia, or Asia. That's right, he's Antarctican. I 3-bet to 140 to pump this pot up a little. The opponent isn't impressed with how much we pump. He pumps it back to 540. Sometimes in poker there are some reg battles that occur when two players are going at each other to either establish dominance or because they know the other is capable of 3 or 4 betting light. That could be what's going on here, but I don't get that sense so much. The opponent started the hand with over 4,700. We'd like to acquire all of it, and the sooner we get the money in, the better. I 5-bet to 1,100, giving the opponent an opportunity to either call or 6-bet jam. 5 bets are very rare. The opponent looks at me as if to say, I've got a strong hand. We both got big stacks. Do you really want to play for all of it against me here? The answer is yes, I do. He's getting 3-1 and can't fold any pocket pair or a hand like ace-king, or maybe even ace-queen suited. He calls. We're heads up with over 2,000 in the middle already. Effective stack to pot ratio is low, meaning it'll be easy to get the rest of the chips in the middle. The flop comes queen 10-7 rainbow. It's not the best because we could be up against pocket queens, and pocket kings won't feel comfortable putting in tons of money since that hand doesn't beat aces or queens. Ace-king is also live against us. The opponent checks. If we're up against a set, he's just going to double up through me and win a pot of over $9,000 in a 5-10 game because I'm not going to be folding aces after 5-betting. It doesn't help to worry about that at the moment. Instead, I need to target hands that I'm beating and figure out a way to extract the max from pocket kings and ace-king. If the player has ace-king, he won't be able to call a large bet because in a 5-bet pot, he'll either be chopping or he'll be drawing extremely slim on this flop. A jack is the only card that he'll feel good about seeing. I make a significant down bet to 600 so that the opponent basically has to call with ace-king, ace-queen, kings, or even jacks. If he does call, he'll have less than a pot-sized bet left in his stack, all by design. The small sizing should look a lot like I could have ace-king with hopes of keeping control of the pot while getting to see a turn relatively cheaply and perhaps even a river cheaply if I want to check back the turn. The opponent only calls, which he still might have done with top set. There are just way more combos of hands that we're beating than there are a top set. The turn is the 5 of diamonds. It's a blank, except there's a flush draw out there now, and the ace of diamonds is unaccounted for. The opponent checks. He's got just over 3,000 in his stack. We've got him covered. It wouldn't be super unreasonable to jam, but what exactly would that accomplish? Every combination of ace-king other than ace-king of diamonds would snap fold. Ace-queen would probably feel inclined to fold also, and we saw me fold pocket kings on a queen-high board to a shove in a similar spot earlier. A shove may fold out every hand that I'm beating and only get called by top set. I go a very tricky route with a check back. As long as the jack doesn't come out, I'll be fairly confident that we've got the best hand. This check back will look a ton like we've got ace-king, and it could induce some bluff shoves from our opponent if he has ace-king, and we can still shove on the river to get maximum value out of kings and ace-queen hands. Potentially, we can even get called light by pocket jacks. The river is another 10. There really aren't any 10s that the opponent will have in his range, other than maybe some tiny percentage of the time he'll have pocket 10s, and there's only one combo of that possible. Overall, I feel good about a non-diamond 10 coming out. I feel even better as the opponent checks. After we check back the turn, I'd anticipate the opponent betting or shoving for value with queens full, though there's a possibility that he could be checking to induce a bluff shove. Now is when we make our play. We're going to go for it all, and either get snap called by a boat, get a snap fold out of ace-king, or we'll see the opponent go into the tank with the worst hand that he'll feel obligated to call with, knowing that he's getting over 2-1. It's the moment of truth.
On?
We don't get snap called, so we almost for sure have the best hand. A small c-bet and check back on the flop, followed by a shove on the river, should look very suspect. It should look like I'm making a desperate last-ditch effort to steal this pot with ace-king to potentially get my opponent off a chop or get him to fold a hand like ace-queen or kings. The player clearly doesn't have ace-king as he's taking his time contemplating what to do. I don't envy his situation at all. I was in nearly the same one with probably the same hand on a very similar board. If he calls, this will be the biggest pot that I've ever won in a 5-10 game. I've never been in a hand like this down the street at Bellagio in the 1500 cap game. The biggest pot I've won in the 5-10 there is maybe 5,500 to 6,000. We still need to get called if we want to eclipse that amount, and I know our opponent is good enough to fold. I can tell that he's not happy, but after over a minute, he puts in the calling chip. We give him the bad news. We win the biggest pot that I've ever won in a 5-10 game. There was no straddle on this hand, so it's truly a pot of over 900 big blinds in what I'm sure is a cooler situation. There's some tiny chance that we got called by jacks due to our line appearing strange, but it's way more probable that the opponent had pocket kings. We were able to win the absolute max from a solid pro. He wants to buy back the chips that we acquired from him. Rather than pushing his stack to us, he takes out 3 yellow 1K chips to hand over to us instead. What I was already considering to be a great day has gotten even better for us. We're playing 6-handed at the moment as the elf limps in for 50. Gazzy Phil raises to 200 from the under the gun straddle. We've got jack 10 of spades and double straddle. I call. Small blind calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. The dealer puts out 8-7-4 all spades. We flop a flush with a straight flush draw. Small blind checks. As he's doing this, Gazzy looks at his cards for a spade outside of the camera's view. Gazzy checks. I know exactly what suits and denomination my cards are, but I check my cards purely for deception and balance so that when I'm genuinely checking to see if I have one card with a particular suit in my hand, good players like Gazzy won't be able to rule out me having flushes. To fully commit to the facade, I sneakily check back the flush. I'm a lot more comfortable checking back the jack-high flush in this instance because the 9 of spades will give us the absolute nuts, and that card might allow us to stack anyone holding the ace of spades. If the flop were 8-4-3 all spades, I'd be less inclined to check back a vulnerable flush. The turn is another 7 pairing the board. Small blind checks. Gazzy is now more confident that his third pair with the straight flush draw is best. He bets 400. If Gazzy was genuinely checking his cards for a spade on the flop, then he won't have 2 spades for a better flush. He wouldn't have a set or 2 pair that turn into a full house either because the spade versions for the denomination of cards he'd be holding would be on the flop and Gazzy wouldn't need to check for him. This is an extremely reliable live tell with recreational players, but you still need to be careful with players that have been around for a while because they might switch things up on you, like I've been attempting to do throughout the hand. Gazzy is certainly capable of fake checking his cards for a spade, so I can't completely rule out him having ace or king high flushes. I've just significantly discounted it in my mind, partly because there are so many spades that are already accounted for. I call, which I might have done with a variety of pair or 1 spade combinations. Small blind folds, it's down to heads up. The river is the deuce of diamonds, we've gotten a great run out. The opponent checks, which I don't think you do very often with a better flush. Between the live tells coupled with how this has been played, I've mostly ruled out all the hands that are beating us. Now I've got the green light to bet, and because of the false live tells I was attempting to give off and my weak looking line so far, I go with a huge overbet at 2,000 to make it appear as if I'm attempting a last ditch effort to seal this pot as a bluff with something like King 10 offsuit with 1 spade. Gazzy has removal to straights and flushes, plus our story doesn't make any sense, especially if we were truly checking our cards on the flop for 1 spade. My river play doesn't seem consistent with physical tells or how I played the hand earlier. Gazzy has to see.
Wow. What a play by Brad, the overbet.
There's a lot of 30 houses. Look at one of the small neighborhoods. And a lot of the
Brad's making some plays.
There's a lot of nuance to that hand that leads us to getting our big overbet paid off. It's even more interesting because I wouldn't have attempted those tricks if I wasn't up against an opponent who I know is a good thinking player. We get the perfect run out to make the maximum from just a pair of sixes.